Welcome back to another edition of the podcast, and today is our official National League playoff final preview between Oldham Athletic and Southend United. The highly anticipated final is upon us, just 2 days away now, the time of recording. And tonight I'm delighted to be joined by Sam Collyer to preview the final in depth. Of course, I've produced quite a lot of content over the last couple of days, interviewing sets of supporters, people who played in finals in the past, and we've got all their predictions. However, no one's heard mine. No one's heard Sam's prediction either yet, unless he's put it on Twitter somewhere. But Sam, firstly, how are you doing tonight?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on again. I'm really looking forward to this podcast. There's a lot to talk about. It's two really strong teams going into the final. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack surrounding it, and I'm looking forward to doing it all.
Yeah, I think overall, when you look on social media, and with the bookies as well, Oldham are the slight favourites, and I say slight because it really is a really tough game to call. If just looking at that, how do you feel that's going to affect potentially Oldham when potentially the pressure's on them compared to Southend? Or do you disagree with that and think there's more pressure on Southend than there is Oldham?
To be fair, I haven't really thought about that too much. It's a good question, really, because Oldham, there's been a lot of points in the season this year where Oldham have kind of maybe been overlooked, and they've not maybe been appreciated as much at times. I'm guilty of that personally. I thought they would be quite comfortably beaten by York in the playoffs. So I was wrong about that, but there hasn't quite been a situation this season in which Oldham have gone into a really high pressure game with the expectancy of going to win it. So it could very much have an effect mentally. Especially against a tough Southend side. But like you said, the bookies predictions are so tight at the moment. It's really hard to separate these two sides because they're very similar in the way they play, also, but yet have some slight counteractive differences. But yeah, it's just going to make out for a great game, I think. And yeah, I think Oldham. I don't know if it will affect Oldham too much, if I'm being totally honest.
If we actually look as well in the past and the history, reading out a few stats now with the National League playoffs, since the new format's been introduced, the National League playoff final has not been completed in full time in the past 4 seasons. And 3 of those 4 times have gone all the way to penalties. What do you think that, if we're going on that kind of stat there, it suggests that it's highly likely that this game won't be done in full time and potentially may even go to penalties. Do you agree?
Yeah, it makes for a tight game. It always brings twists and turns in the playoffs, especially in the final. Recent years, we've had a few fairly close finals. Bromley Solihull, fairly close matchup. This year, I think it is so tight. So if we were to go and see it go to extra time and penalties, it would not surprise me in the slightest.
I agree totally as well. And you look at both sides and the seasons that they've both had as well. It's been mixed season. It's not been straightforward where they've both had brilliant in league campaigns, have they? Particularly, you look at Oldham. Yes, they've made the playoffs. I think that was the intention at the start of the season. Let's make the playoffs. I don't think they ever were thinking, we're going to win the title this year. Of course, the more optimistic fans will have done. But then I think for Southend as well, it was like, let's just make the playoffs. And throughout the season, they've had the ups and downs, the differences in form. But what makes this final so interesting is the fact that both sides have come into great form at a perfect time.
Yeah, it's crazy, really. With Oldham, they've kind of rocked up to the playoffs and are suddenly playing their best football of the season. It makes you almost question where that's been all year. But they turned up to York in the semi-finals and absolutely tactically outclassed them. They unfortunately for you, they turned up to Halifax and where they comfortably saw you off as well. With Southend, again, it's been ups and downs this season, but you could kind of predict this going into the playoffs with Southend a bit more, seeing that they were on a bit more of an upturn of form come the back end of the season, which is what got them in the playoffs. Whereas with Oldham, they kind of hung on at the back end. Maybe results didn't go their way at certain times they wanted to, and maybe they didn't finish in the position in the league they would have hoped for. But it is a final which I'm kind of shocked to see Oldham there based off of the season. But when you look at the playoffs and the way they performed, I think, they're more than deserved to be in this final. Like I said, I just question with Oldham where this has been all season. They've kind of just come to life in the elimination and the semi-final, and there's no better time to come to life in a situation like this. But I feel like there's part of me that look at Oldham and think it must be a little bit frustrating looking at this, seeing what they're capable of, and and them leaving it this late to show that.
We spoke in the past, and I have on my podcast about Oldham, and I put this season into 3 different thirds. The first third, I thought they were excellent with that squad. They were actually in the title race towards the end of that first third. Second third was obviously when January came around. You had their injuries, players left, players were recalled from loan, and they did really struggle after that. And I think if they'd have carried on how they were doing, and if they'd have had that whole season with that squad from January onwards until the final third, I genuinely think they will be nowhere near the playoffs. And I've got a lot of stick about my 12th place prediction. I reckon they would have finished about 12th with that squad from January up until probably the final third of the season. However, you have to give them credit. That final third, players came back from injury. They made a few additions. Additions as well came in who were injured and injury prone, but they've been fit for the final third of the season. They've got into decent form, and then now they've really turned it up a gear going into these playoffs. And what I think surprises me so much is how they're actually tearing sides apart. They're not grinding out results. I thought they may be built for the playoffs. It's pretty obvious they've got a lot of experience with the players. They've got players who've won the playoffs, but I didn't expect them to be absolutely destroying sides like the Halifax side. Yes, potentially, but definitely not going away to York and winning that game how they did. I thought if they are going to get to the final, it'll be maybe how Southend have, where they've been grinding out results.
Yeah, I mean, Oldham, I think you banged the nail on the head there with, the signings that they've made have kind of come to life at this stage of the season. I do look at the side they've put in out recently, and I do think one significant change that's kind of made a huge difference to them is bringing in Pritchard on that right wing back position. Yeah. Having Regan Ogle play as the right centre back in a 3. One thing you can utilise in that is that you have a right centre half who can get forward and support the wing back, but it also gives that wing back a bit more freedom to get a bit further forwards, make the most out of their creativity, purely because Ogle is good at defending the channels. He's used to doing that. And I think you're seeing that with Pritchard playing there. With Corey Evans coming in as well, he's been injured, but he's come into the heart of that midfield. Him and Pet are kind of running the show. And then obviously, there's been a lot of plaudits given towards Vimal Yoganathan, who has been, he's been absolutely superb since he's come in. The energy he brings to that side. And I think that is something that we've kind of spoke about over the course of this year of Oldham, where maybe they lacked energy in midfield and they lacked legs because they do opt to have the older kind of personnel in there. But Yoganathan's come in and he's been absolutely superb. So yeah, I think the signings that they've made have kind of really come to life at this stage of the season and made a huge difference for them.
I think they've got a defined style as well now, Oldham. Whereas that first third, I thought they certainly did. Second third, it felt like they lost themselves. They were trying to play that same style, but they didn't have the players to do that. Of course, they lost Clucas, which I think was the biggest loss. Everyone will look and say, well, Stones clearly was. For me, I think when you lose a midfielder that's as pivotal as that, it clearly had a detrimental effect on them. Whereas Stones, I felt fond of, particularly in this final third, it has stepped up. Garn has come in and stepped up as well. I didn't really see that as a massive concern. But the players who've come in, the likes of Rossiter, Pet, Corey Evans, they've been excellent, particularly in these playoffs, and they've come into form at a great time. And that's probably why I think they've been so successful. And you mentioned Pritchard there on the right-hand side at wing-back. I think it's been excellent. But I think a player that's made the biggest difference for me in this side, and in the regular season, I don't think anyone was particularly talking about him too much. But in these playoffs, he's been my player of the playoffs so far, and that's Yoganathan. I think he's been absolutely excellent.
Yeah, so it shows, at this level of football, how important it is to utilise loan deals and, make the most of having that transfer window open throughout the course of the season. He's had loan moves here and there, Yoganathan, but he's come in, he's really made that position his own now. With the likes of Evans and Pett in the midfield behind him, who are they're quite organised in the way they play and structured in their positioning. You know, it gives him the freedom to use that energy he's got to press and harry and hassle people. And I think one thing he also brings to the side is an aerial threat as well. You know, they are a direct team at times, Oldham, and you know, when you're playing someone like Jürgen Nathan behind Fondop, you know, utilising those wing backs to put balls into the box. You know, his late runs into the area where he's got the handful of goals he has scored from. You know, it makes a huge difference. And I think Garner up front next to Fondop's also played a part in Jürgen Nathan's success, because those two in a press seem to be, you know, extremely impressive. And I think, you know, it's a huge reasoning for Oldham's turn of form.
We look at Southend and the route they've taken to the final as well. They've looked down and out, I would say, in both games at times. Rochdale 3-1 down, came back and won 4-3. Even Forest Green 1-0 down, equalised 2-1 down. The game looks like it was over, and they found that equaliser and went on to win on penalties. Yeah, how would you describe their route to the final?
Gritty is what I describe it as. You know, it kind of sums up their season, really. You know, the never say die attitude that they have. You know, they've got into the playoffs over the last 2 games of the season. You know, they've had a bit of a roller coaster this year with upturns in form. They lost Cardwell at the start of the season, which and since, you know, they had Peppel, but also lost him, and they've not really been able to replicate having that kind of consistent goal scoring threat. But they've overcome adversity all season, Southend, and I think that's been shown in the playoffs so far. Ultimately, I think that's something Oldham will probably, you know, slightly fear, because that never say die attitude, it just gives you that ability to kind of just pick something out of nothing at times. And even looking away from that, they have a structured style of football. They knock the ball around well. They have players in their side who are capable of controlling the tempo of a game and putting their foot on the ball, you know, taking the sting out of things. And I think that works massively in their favour. So, you know, they're definitely not a side that, you know, going into this playoffs and having finished 7th in the league, you would think, oh yeah, you know, they're probably lucky to be there, because, you know, I think the recent form and that grittiness to get over the line, you know, it's shown how much they deserve it.
I think for them in the regular season as well, probably more than Oldham, they weren't pulling up any trees at all. And I think it's fair to say it was more them being fortunate and a little bit lucky why they've made the playoffs than the actual case of, you know, they came really good towards the end of the season. Of course, they did get a bit of momentum, particularly after that 3-0 win against Wealdstone. But I think the likes of Gateshead, Altrincham, did gift it to them, and a door was open to them in those final 2 games, and they certainly took the opportunity. And in the playoffs, it's not been about luck at all for me. I think you've mentioned there about grit and that determination and that never say die attitude, and that does really go a long way.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think these 2 teams in the final at the moment, they're prime examples of how big of a difference a couple games can make at this level of football. You know, throughout the course of the season, you've seen, you know, Mickey Mellon and Kevin Mayer both under, you know, pretty heavy pressure at times in terms of security of their job. Even, you know, Mickey Mellon all the way up until this first game of the playoffs. Kevin Mayer in a period in which, you know, they were really struggling to get going, Southend. Both of them, you know, very much in a different side, in a different universe, probably could have, you know, lost their jobs at some point this season. But, you know, they've overcome that adversity, and like you said, that grit and determination. You know, it's not luck. You know, they hang in there and they almost make their own luck essentially. But you know, it's great to see 2 teams like this. You know, the stature of these 2 teams essentially in the playoff final, and I think it's going to make for a really good event.
Yeah, a record attendance breaking game this will be now. I believe it's officially confirmed they've sold more tickets than the previous record. The only disappointment is that they have capped tickets. I'm not sure how much that's going to stop certain fans from going now, because they are releasing more and more. But yeah, what's your thoughts on that overall, and how many do you reckon would be sold if there wasn't a cap?
So when people started suggesting, you know, we might see, you know, 50, 60,000 here, you know, the first thing I thought was this is just not going to happen, and it's not due to the fact the amount of fans are going to that are going to want tickets and the amount of tickets they could sell. It's just Wembley, they never seem to open the full stadium. They never have for the playoff finals in the National League. And, I expected as well there to be uproar with the first set of tickets to be released. And, there was, because they always lowball with the first set of tickets. I think they should be looking at this in a different manner to what they are, really. It's too big sides who, probably rightfully deserve to be in the Football League, battling out. One team has to stay down, one team takes it all. I think they should take advantage of that, and I think they probably should have put more tickets out. I think it would be silly for them to not, make the most of the atmosphere and the fans that could come, make a great day of it. But all in all, I wasn't particularly surprised to see them cap tickets. There's been a lot of events at Wembley recently, and they never seem to, the upper tiers are never usually open for the playoff finals. But I think it shows the testament and the power of the fans at this level of football to have protested. There's been uproar about it, and it's forced a change. More tickets have come because of that. So I think fans of the two teams can probably give themselves a round of applause for that.
Yeah, I totally agree with your point on that. And as well, just looking at both clubs themselves as well, who do you think is better equipped? I mean, in the actual team, nothing to do with fan bases or anything like that, but the actual team to go into the EFL. I'm not asking who you think is going to win, but whoever does get promoted on the day, who do you think is better equipped to go up to the EFL and put more of a stamp on it?
It's really difficult, that, because Oldham, they seem to have a bit of a shorter term approach. They have a few, important players, like Yoga Nathan, who are young but on loan. They're not actually Oldham's players. And then the key players they do have maybe on the older side. Whereas Southend, they've got a fair few young talents in their side who are, they've got the potential and room to grow as a team. So you're kind of looking at, the opposite ends of the scale and having to try and find a middle ground and to determine who's got a more competent side. I think it's really tricky. I think experience counts for a lot in Football League, and I think having experience and older heads in the side can go a long way. So I think Oldham might just edge it in terms of who's a bit more ready. But I would have no doubt in both teams to survive if they were to get promoted next season.
Yeah, I think most sides who've been involved in these playoffs would survive League Two, because it does really take a lot, I think, to get relegated. The only thing I will say is, although I think both sides would probably comfortably survive, considering the size of both clubs, I don't think they'd particularly set League Two alight, maybe like you've seen Notts County, Chesterfield, because I haven't seen enough from them in the regular league season from either side to make me think, yeah, these are two sides that are really, have got the players to really, push on in League Two. Of course, there's certain individuals, but something you might say specifically about Oldham is Joganathan. I think if you took him out of this Oldham side going into the final, I think they would really struggle. And I think it's the same with, like, so if you took Corby Evans out, I know there's other players who can come in, but this is the difference with Oldham, is the fact I think it only takes to have one player out of the team, and I think it has an effect on them. And we saw that earlier on in the season with Clucas leaving and the effect it had, and Manny Mumford being out injured as well, and the effects that had. But what I will say is, you mentioned experience, that is crucial. They've got a bigger squad. I know both sides have the ability to be able to bring in players in the summer, but I think Oldham already had bring that depth. I think we'll go a long way in League Two. Also, if I look at Southend, like I said, it's a lot smaller squad. I've mentioned in the regular season as well. I think Southend fans have to agree they're quite fortunate to be in the playoffs. I know whoever finishes seventh on the 46th game week is who deserves to be in the playoffs. But for a side to be seventh and get promoted to the Football League when they've been outside of the playoffs all season, well, for the majority of the season, I'll say, until the final 2 game weeks, and of course at the start of the season they were in a little bit. I think it would take a lot for them to really put a stamp on League Two. I think both would comfortably survive though. Yeah,
I agree with pretty much all of that, to be fair. But I feel like there's a stigma these days, kind of National League teams going up into League Two, and what's expected of them, purely because of as in recent years, you've seen Wrexham and Stockport go up, you've seen Chesterfield get playoffs, you've seen Notts County get playoffs, and I think it kind of stifles what the realistic expectations should be when going up a division. I think Personally, I don't actually see Barnet this next season, going and making a huge statement. I can see, especially seeing, the three signings they've made so far. I see them kind of maybe sitting upper mid table at the most. But I don't think there's any shame in that, and I don't think that's a slight on Barnet at all. I think that's kind of the average, the reasonable expectation when stepping up a level. So yeah, I think, like you said, I think both of them would comfortably survive, but I think they'd both be in that reasonable standard of kind of mid-table, lower mid-table. And I think if you are a team getting promoted, that's completely okay, because it gives you time to build on next season and a bit of money in the bank to kind of make sure that team is competent the next year of maybe taking it to that next level.
Now we'll come to the live chat and see what you guys have been saying. The first person in tonight is Sam. He said Oldham to win 3-1, Fondop, Garner ×2, and Hopper to score for Southend. Henry's coming Southend 2-1 after going 1-0 down. Someone's actually asked him if he's on crack. To be fair, it's not that unreasonable of a prediction. Southend, we've had someone come in and say, come on then, Oldham. Evening, lads, that's from a Wrexham supporter. He said 4-1 to Oldham. Kezza's here. Peter, you said, come on, the Blues. I don't know which Blues it is, to be fair, because I'm sure both sides see themselves as Blues. We've had another Oldham fan. How many tickets have Oldham sold? 21k. Let's hope it doesn't go to pens. I think we're closing in on 30,000. 3 years later, and I'm still listening to your NL coverage from Wrexham. Great stuff. It's good to have you here, Scott. He's put, I'm from Oldham purely for the chairman, although Southend as well, as because if the troubles that they've got. I think whoever gets promoted, I think it's a great story for both clubs. Southend, there's that narrative, isn't there, of them nearly going out of existence. They were that close. They were caught here in a way a different judge could have, wrapped them up. And even this season, the way they've sneaked into the playoffs so late on. But also, you look at Oldham, ex-Premier League club, fallen all the way to the National League, which is probably the lowest of the lows for their history. For them to have the opportunity to get back to promote to the EFL, I think both stories are great.
Yes, it'll be a momentous occasion for both sides. Whoever wins, Oldham, they've had their financial troubles in recent years as well. So arguably that's the reason that they're down at this level. But it's two teams of huge stature, and I think the attendance, or the expected attendance is very telling of that. So I'm really excited to see what the atmosphere is like at this game. I'll be hopefully in attendance for it, which will be good. I couldn't miss this kind of event. I feel like it's going to be something that's quite record breaking for the National League, and I think it's going to be a great day for for everyone involved, really.
Yeah, it's first playoff final that I'll have attended as well in the National League, so I'm looking forward to it. And you speak about both fan bases, and already in the live chat there's a lot of comments of a bit of banter between both fans. So yeah, it should be a good spectacle, to be honest. But yeah, I'm trying to find comments that are actually relevant and not just arguments. But I'll try find one anyway. Someone's put, Southend would do awful in League Two. Oldham maybe better, but not good enough to get past the top half. I think that's from a Barnet fan. Yeah, I'm not too sold on either side doing well in League Two, like particularly well. But I think they both survive because it's so League Two towards the bottom. It's such a poor standard.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's kind of like on the scale of expectation. What is bad really? I look at League Two and I look at teams like Accrington, Harrogate. They're just kind of they're kind of just lingering around that bottom end of the division. Yeah, exactly. They don't have that kind of that urge to want to kick on. Southend, I think, with the fan base that they have, and the trouble they've had in recent years, I just think the general momentum that they have would take them ahead of those teams. And I think you look at the team they've got, and I think it is quite underrated. I do think they have areas they need to strengthen in. I think that Southend are significantly quite weak up front. I'm not exactly sold on Charlie Kendall personally. Having watched him at Woking. Tom Hopper's not a bad striker at all, but Bonds kind of failed to maybe reach the heights that are expected, and Walker's maybe been injured for extended periods of the year. But I do look at Southend and I think that midfield and that defence that they do have is actually quite strong. Keenan Forson is an absolutely exceptional footballer. So is Leon Chambers-Parallon. Both of them are two young talents who, if Southend don't go up, they'll do well to keep them in the summer because they're both they're highly rated players. And then you look to their back line, the likes of Nathan Ralph and Taylor and stuff like that. They've got that quality, and I think that structure that they have and the experience and the, I don't know what the word is, the sensible heads almost they've got in their side will kind of guide them to success if they were to get promoted. But it's one of those situations where time will tell really if they are to go up.
Let's talk lineups then for the final. I think for me, in looking at Oldham overall, I don't think they'll need to change anything. Neither match has gone to extra time. Also, there's a big gap between those games as well. And I wouldn't change a winning team. I know you could say the same about Southend, but games have gone the whole way. But yeah, for me, for Oldham, they found a winning formula with that starting 11. I don't think they need to change it at all. Do you disagree with that, or?
For Oldham, yeah, I agree. I think they'll look to line up the exact same as they have in the two other playoff games. It's effectively got them playing their best football of the season. And like I said, it's a distinct system that has shown success in competitive matches. So yeah, I don't see any reason Oldham will need to change their lineup.
I think as well, there's the likes of James Norwood, and this is what I respect Oldham and Mickey Mellon for overall. I think Norwood played under Mellon in the past, actually guided Tranmere to promotion, scored in the final of the playoffs last time. Mellon knows how to get the best out of him. He's not rushed him back into the team since he's come back to injury, and he's had trust in, obviously, Fondop, but to pair Fondop up top, he's had Garner and stuck with Garner, and that is because they get the best out of each other. And I think for Mellon, he knows what he needs to do in these playoffs, and that's what's worked so effectively. And in the midfield, I wouldn't change it. A midfield that's winning your matches defensively. I think they're the strongest they've been all season, in my opinion. So I don't think they need to change that at all. On Southend side of things, a little bit more. Go on, sorry, Sam.
Oh no, I was just going to say, yeah, on the Norwood situation, I agree with what you're saying. He's been out injured, and I think Garner's taken that opportunity. I think it is genuinely a really, really basic, setup they have in terms of just a little and large striker partnership. Is from for years and years it's worked. Fondop he's a big target man. He'll win headers. He'll hold the ball up, play with his back to goal, and he'll try and get on the end of things in the box. Garner, he's for an old centre forward. He's mobile. He'll press, he'll work hard, he'll hassle and harry and try and force errors out of people. He can also play on the last man, and that will stretch opposition's back lines. So I think the partnership they've got, is it's been a huge part of Oldham's success in recent weeks as well.
Certainly has, and you think of the likes of Norwood, I'm sure he'd come on from the bench, and that is one of Oldham's strengths. I know Southend have probably got more depth than they've had all season at the moment, but I still would say I think Oldham have got that bit more depth if it did go to extra time. They've got the likes of Norwood on the bench who can come on and change a game. There's a number of players there, who you could have for Oldham, but they don't need to change the side. But what impresses me is the fact that if the game isn't going to plan, I do think they have got the players on the bench to be able to come on and make an impact.
Yeah, I agree there. I think Oldham, they've got the likes of even to the likes of Uchegbalam, who can come on, add a little bit of a burst of pace in that side. I don't quite think Southend have that kind of player. It's all those little. When it gets to a later stage in the game, I think the little influences and the standout attributes really come to light for these kind of impact players. And I think Oldham, they just have those kind of players on that bench. Even the likes of Worthington could come on with he offers some legs. You've got the likes of Rossiter can come on. He breaks up play well. Those kind of attributes are what can help you see a game out. And so I do agree that I think Oldham probably a bit stronger off the bench.
Yeah, someone has also from Southend perspective, and this is what I'm saying about I think Southend have got more depth than they've had all season. Kendall and Bonn off the bench is lethal, and that does kind of bring us on to the point about Southend and that starting 11. Defensively, for me, I don't think they need to change anything. I think they're fine as they are. Midfield's an interesting one. If you actually look at the previous starting 11 and the impact the subs have had, would you bring the subs to start? Some of them potentially. So defensively, you've got Hussein in the middle as like a holding midfielder with Coker. would you bring Cav Miley in, because he certainly made an impact on that game, and the likes of Bridge as well? I think I'd at least bring one of those in, but I'll let you speak first before I give my opinions.
Yeah, it's a tricky question, really, because Southend, they do kind of, it does feel like in terms of what they do have, despite maybe not being as strong on the bench, I feel like if they were to chop and change their team, it would have slightly less of an effect. Um, you know, Hussein maybe hasn't had as strong a season as he would have liked, but he seems to be playing quite well in recent weeks, and Holding, it has really worked. Forson, Chambers, Parallon next to him in midfield, I think is superb. I think both of them are untouchable in that team. Coca is one I do think, could be susceptible to being, changed around. And I think if you change Coca, you could end up changing the shape completely. They're playing this narrow 4-4-2 system at the moment, Southend, but I think they could very much change to a back five if they do feel the need to. And I think if you could shift Ralph into a centre back role, bring Bridge on at left wing back, and play that flat midfield three, and essentially that would allow them to go man for man with Oldham. Whether that's the right way to go about it for them, I don't know. But I do think the question for me is who's going to start up front for Southend. I know Southend fans are quite big fans of Kendall, especially off the bench. From my time watching Kendall at Woking, he did seem to have a fair impact off the bench against tired legs. But when he did start, he seemed to be fairly anonymous. I'm pretty sure he scored every single goal for Woking. He did score, or near enough all of them, from the bench. But I think this kind of game, it does depend how Mayer looks at it, in the way that, do you want to start Kendall, who can really, really hassle and harry two big centre-backs with the likes of Mumph and Raglan, or do you want to try and go, man for man, try and win duels against them and pick Bon out? That's kind of the question I ask about this team. I do think Hopper will probably be starting, but there's many options for Southend, and I think that might come to be a strength for them, essentially, because they could have said they could change system completely, and probably not exactly weaken themselves as a side.
I think Hopper's crucial for me to start, not particularly in terms of his goals, but the way he presses as well. And then you've got the other forward as well who can press. Kendall started against Forest Green. He didn't score in that game. It's quite hard, the two forwards. Macaulay Bonne, he's been good off the bench, I thought, in both fixtures too. I don't know, that's a really difficult question, those two forwards up top. I think for me, I go Hopper. And I think I probably would stick with Kendall. I know you said he's anonymous when he starts, but I just think, I don't know, would you have, I think Hopper's nailed on. Then you've got Kendall, Bonne, potentially even Walker. I don't know. Who are your two then?
It's tricky. See, I think Hopper and Bonne are the best two to start in this kind of match. I think Bonne and Hopper are both two experienced players. We said experience goes a long way. And I also look at, in terms of late on in a match, as a if you're a centre back, what would be the last thing you want to come up against late on in a match when you've got tired legs? And I think that's pace. And Kendall has pace in abundance, Bonne not so much. So I think in the scenario at hand, I think Bonne's experience is valuable to the side, whereas Kendall's pace off the bench would be quite effective if necessary. So I think I would go with Bonne.
In terms of the midfield, then, Hussein, you spoke about him, Miley, Bridge. What I think is crucial about Southend is I feel like they've got to get it spot on for this match. I don't necessarily think they can look at the previous two matches and say, yeah, we'll just play the same way, because Oldham are a very different proposition to the previous two in these playoffs specifically. Oldham have played the same way in both matches and have been excellent, and it's been effective. And I think they'll try and do the same going into this Southend game, where the oppositions of who Oldham have come up against in Hinchelwood and Millington's sides, I don't think those two managers have tactically got it right for either game. And I think Kevin Mayer, he's got to get it tactically spot on. He's got to get his starting 11 perfect, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that that will raise some tricky questions for him. You pointed out that midfield there, and the one that I kind of look at that I think may be susceptible to being dropped is Ollie Coker. He's kind of been in and out of the team throughout the course of the season as it is, and he has come in during the playoffs. But also, I think in terms of making it tactically spot on for Oldham, I do think that Mayer might look at that and think the structure of the team is so important, and making sure that out of possession they're really strong and stable. So I think that there's a good chance that Mayer could look at that and he could drop Coker for Bridge, and he could go to a back three, chuck Bridge a wing back, tuck Ralph into left of the back three. But I don't know. There's so many options for him. I think it will probably be Bridge in for Coker. Or I think if I were in this situation, I'd go Bridge for Coker. Whether you play Bridge in that 10 or if you play him out wide, I'm not sure. But I think the other three midfield options are probably
nailed on.
I'd say go on as far as they're untouchable. Forson and Chambers Parallon absolutely are. Hussein, again, you raised the question of Cav Miley maybe. Neither of which have had maybe the greatest of seasons. But I think May will probably stick with Hussein purely for the fact that you don't want to overchange it at the risk of getting it wrong.
I think as well, in the midfield, you've got to think about players that can impact off the bench. Would Coker really bring much of an impact coming off from the bench? Bridge certainly did. We saw what he did against Forest Green Rovers. Yes, you want to reward players for having an impact like that. He clearly did against Forest Green Rovers, but it's a final. It's got to be spot on. And if it's late in the game, I think neither way. I think this game is going to go all the way, because we've seen in previous finals, most of them genuinely do go all the way. And they're close finals. Maybe not all the way, but they're always close finals. I think the other day, I'd start Bridge over Coker or Hussein, and maybe I'd have Miley come in even as well. But then again, would those two be able to have an impact on from the bench? So that's what I'm thinking. I'd probably have Cav Miley over Hussein, and I think I'd probably keep Bridge on the bench just because I know the impact that he could have off from the bench, particularly if you're bringing him on alongside someone like Kendall late on in the game.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. I think it's similar to what it's so tricky to put kind of a finger on how to function at midfield for Southend, because there's so many options. And to be fair, if you're Kevin May looking at it, and it's a problem, but it's almost a good problem as a manager because it shows the strength in your squad. But yeah, I think my final options would probably be Hussein Holding, Forson and Chambers Parallon, and I'd probably play. I'm going to stick with Coker, I think, actually. After going kind of almost against what I said, I feel like at the risk of, overchanging it, I think Coker, I'm going to stick with Coker in that 10 role. And I think they'll stay playing the 4 at the back. And maybe, because I don't know if going man-to-man against Oldham in the same shape would exactly favour them. So yeah, I'm going to stick with the same 4 midfield, I think.
Now, we're going to talk more about the final very shortly, but I thought it'd be a good opportunity to do a combined 11 for the final. So we're going to go with that anyway. Let's have a look then. So I'm using FotMob to do this, so hopefully it looks okay. This is the formation that we've got. I'd call it a 5-3-2. I know I'm saying that's an attacking midfielder. Other people would probably go 5-3-2 in terms of the actual 2 strikers. I think technically it'd be a 5-4-1. I think me and Sam have both agreed to go with this formation. Yeah, are you okay with this then, Sam?
Yeah, I'm completely fine with this formation. I think it's what I go with. I like I said, we spoke about the striking options, and I do think, with the exception of one player in both these teams combined, I do think in a strongest team, I think only one striker would get in. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with this formation.
We're going to have a look at the goalkeeper then, starting things off. There's 2 options here for the keeper. We can either go with Matthew Hudson of Oldham, or we can go with Nick Hayes. There's one nailed on for me, but I'll hear who would you go for first?
Yeah, for me, this is an absolute no-brainer, and it's Nick Hayes. I've seen Hudson play on multiple occasions this season, and he looks shaky at times. he doesn't look like someone that I'd exactly trust to be in my team. Whereas Nick Hayes, he's come in, since moving from Barnet to Southend, he's come in and he's kind of reinstilled confidence into that back line, and he's done a really good job since arriving. So for me, this is an absolute no-brainer picking Hayes.
Yeah, I'm the exact same. Did well for Barnet, got the move to Southend and done excellent there as well. He's been pivotal. I think in both games he's done well as well. To be fair to Hudson, he's kept 2 clean sheets in his previous 2 games, but I don't particularly think he's had too much to do. So I think for me, Nick Hayes, I think he's one of the best goalkeepers in the National League. So I think that's nailed on to pick him. So we've got 3 centre-halves then. I'll start. These are mine that I would go with. I'd go with 2 from Oldham, and that'd be Raglan, Month, and then the Southend player I think I'd have would be Taylor. Do you agree with that?
I've gone slightly different. I've gone Raglan and Month as the 2 from Oldham. But I've gone Ben Goodliff. I think in recent months, he's really come into his own. He's got multiple Player of the Month awards. He's been really, really important. He's even picked up some crucial goals. He's like a magnet to the ball in the box. System-wise, whether Goodliff suits it better, playing a right centre-back role more, is systematically better? Maybe not, but I think he's probably the option I pick to play centre-back if I had to pick probably what I think is the best centre-back at Southend at the moment. But I think Raglan and Month are kind of shoe-ins. I think, Month for me is one of the best centre-backs in this whole division. And I think since last season as well, Raglan's really, really, really taken his game to the next level. And I think his influence at central centre-half for Oldham this season has been a huge impact to them throughout the course of the year.
I think Raglan and Month are both nailed on, definitely. I totally agree with you on that. And I am happy to go with Ben Goodliff as well. I think there's a number of centre-halves that you could have from Southend United. But I'm happy to go with Goodliff. Right, here we go. So they're the 3 centre-halves. Do you want to go left-back or right-back first?
Well, let's go right-back, because I feel like it's an easier one to go with. I'll
just cut in.
Go for it.
I think it is nailed on, but I don't want to do the other player this justice, because since he's come in, he's been excellent, and even in these playoffs as well, he's been excellent. I think everyone knows who we're going to go with. Am I right in thinking we're going to go for Gus Scott Morris? Yeah,
it's got to be Gus Scott Morris. But like you said, I feel like it's what should be, a shoe-in option, an absolute definite, has been made a fairly tough decision, purely based on how well Pritchard's done since coming into the side. I feel like his influence on the team's been massive. Like I said, out of possession, or in possession, with Oldham, almost allowing them to go back to a back 4. Shuffle Ogle across a little bit and push Pritchard on. It really, really benefits them, and makes them a bit more dangerous going forward. But like I said, Gus Scott Morris has just been a different class this year in comparison to every right back in this division, so it's got to be him.
Pritchard's been one of the players of the playoffs for me overall so far. I think he's another player that's been pivotal to Oldham, as you mentioned earlier on in the podcast. But you can't not see past Gus Scott Morris. He's scored 17 goals from right back this season. He's got 5 assists as well in the regular National League season. Scored the winning penalty in the semi-final. Defensively as well, very strong. I think a lot of people forget as well, because he's so good going forward, what he can do defensively. For me, I don't think there'd be any right back in the division that I'd pick over him. If off the top of my head, I think if I were picking my National League team of the season now, I think the first right back that comes to my head, without thinking about it, would have to be Gus Scott Morris.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely, without a doubt. I think he's got to be in that team.
So we've got Gus Scott Morris at right back. Left back, then, this is a little bit more interesting. It's between Nathan Ralph of Southend or Mark Kitchen of Oldham.
This is very, very, very difficult. This is the one that I've got. See, I've got on my sheet right now. I've got this one blank because I have absolutely no idea who to pick here. I feel like Kitchen. He's Mr. Consistent. He's a consistent 7 out of 10 for Kitchen every week. Whereas Ralph, he's versatile. He offers leadership qualities. He'll get into Southend's team. Even if someone else is playing left wing back, he'll slot in at left centre back. He'll get into that Southend side no matter what. So it's a really, really difficult choice for me that I think I'm just gonna have to leave to you to pick, because I'm absolutely stumped on who to choose here.
I'm a massive Mark Kitchen fan, to be fair, overall. I think both are excellent and both are very consistent too. But Kitchen, for me, he offers something going forward. And I think for balance as well, we've picked Scott Morris at right back, when Pritchard, to be fair, it was always going to be Gus Scott Morris to pick him. But Pritchard, I'm a massive fan of him. And I think he's been unfortunate who he's had to come up against. So I think it's only fair that we pick an Oldham player for left back. And it is that type. I would go for Kitchen. He's a player for me. I think he's very underrated in the National League. No one ever talked about him too much. But like you mentioned, he's Mr. Consistent at Oldham. Scores a few goals and offers something going forward as well. So I think I'd be leaning towards Mark Kitchen. But that is very, very close. And I think both right back and left back have probably been, well, particularly left back, has been two of the toughest positions, because both sides are very strong in both positions. This is our defence. Then we've got Nick Hayes of Southend in goal, Goodliff from Southend as well, and then we've got Manny Mont from Raglan from Oldham, and then Kitchen as well from left back from Oldham, and then Gus Scott Morris, who's a Southend player as well. So it's fairly balanced. I think we've got 3 Southend players and 3 Oldham players. Moving into the midfield then now, like the holding midfielder, who we got. So this is the thing. I feel like we're going to put different midfielders in different positions. So we can either go one by one, or we can tell us 3 each if you want. It's up to you.
So I think the positions kind of choose himself. I think the holding midfielder would be between Hussein and Pett, I'd say, probably. Or Evans. Yeah, maybe we do just do them all separate, all as one then, because I think maybe doing them all as one might be, like all 4 together, might be a better option, because there's so many options, so many different players who can play so many different roles in that midfield. It will probably become a bit confusing or unfair picking people in specific roles.
Yeah, that's fine. So do you want me to pick do you want to do 3 off all 4?
Let's go with all 4, because they're all 4 midfield roles.
So I'll tell you my 4, and then I'll get yours, and then we'll make a decision on who the 4 would be. So in like the holding midfield, I've gone for Corey Evans of Oldham. I've then got Jogger Nathan of Oldham. Who else did I have? I have Apaya Forson. And then who's the other midfielder of Southend? And it's that other midfield that's really hard for me. I think those
Parallon? Chambers, was it Parallon?
I think I'd have Pett, Evans, Yoganathan, Forson.
Okay, yeah. I've gone slightly different, and I've gone based off kind of the course of the season. So my holding midfielder, I've gone Tom Pett. I think he dictates the play really well from that deep position. I think having him at the heart of the midfield is huge. I think the energy either side of him. I think Yoganathan picks himself. So that right centre mid slot, I've gone for Yoganathan. Left centre mid slot, I've gone Keelan Forson. I think the energy of those two combined would be absolutely lethal. And then just behind the striker, I've gone for Leon Chambers Parallon. I might get a few pelters for not picking Evans. Very, very high quality player. I just don't think, I'm trying to base this over the course of this season. And, he's been injured all year. And I feel like that almost gives me a bit of a scapegoat to leave him out, because, there's so many other strong options that have proven that over the course of the 48 game season. Or 48 game season for both of these teams, at least. Yeah. So, those would be my 4. I
just think the impact Evans has had on Oldham in the playoffs has been huge, particularly in that York game. You know what? We'll pick we've picked the 3, and I'll just say, I know Evans isn't, but we'll just say Evans as the attacking midfielder, just for the purposes of making this easier. So we've got Pett. We're definitely going to have in this position. I think that is nailed on. we would have Jorgensen, because he's another player. He's only come in the final third of the season, hasn't he, as well? Yet it feels like it's impossible to miss him out.
Yeah. Tricky thing is with Evans is Jorgensen he played throughout the course of the season from when he was signed. Evans, he played 45 minutes when he came in, then he was injured for 2 months, and then he didn't play. And then he came back maybe I think the game or two before the playoffs, and suddenly he's only made a handful of appearances. And also in my head as well, Chambers Parallon is very, very difficult to leave out of this team. So I'm almost just trying to find reasons to slip him into the side. But I couldn't complain with either going in the side really. They're both top players.
Right. I've had the choice on picking Kitchen, so I'll let you have Parallon. But I think I would have Ed. I think that
yeah.
So yeah,
I think that's fair enough. Yeah.
Lawson here. Right. I can spell his name correctly. There we go. It's not coming up now.
It might be a pie of Orson.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
Well, those three for me are nailed on. Although Pet's played more games, this is why I picked Pet. I think in the actual playoffs, I'd have picked Evans over Pet. But I'm happy to go with Pet because he's played more games in the regular season. Parallon, we'll go with him.
I feel like since he's come in, from Slough to Southend, I think he's become a fan favourite. He's really added something to that midfield. They call him the non-league Frank Lampard for a reason, and it is purely because he's just like when he plays, he does just stand out to you. His energy, his dictation of play, his ability to create and get on the end of chances as well from midfield is a huge asset to have in a side. And I know we said just for the sake of this, it would be for the sake of choosing between the two, we'll put them in the 10. But if we are to pick who is someone to actually play behind the striker, I would probably pick Chambers Parallon, but he does also offer more of a goal threat too.
Yeah, this is what I was going to do. I wasn't going to pick Parallon. I was going to have Appy Forson and play him kind of slightly out of position and put him in like a attacking midfield to then fit Evans in, which doesn't really, if you're thinking about a team that's actually playing, it doesn't make too much sense, does it? So
I mean,
I'd be more like picking between Pet and Evans, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, so it's tricky. It's so tricky. Both sides have got so much quality in midfield. If we were to pick either option, I couldn't complain in the slightest. For me personally, I think Chambers Parallon just tips it.
Yeah, because with him as well, he's not made that many. He's only made 20 appearances this season. Corey Evans has made 8. So I think we'll go with Parallon.
Yeah, that's fine by me. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty happy with that. I won't complain.
This is a bit easier now. The striker, I think you can't see.
Well,
the one up top. There's only one.
Yeah, I was going to say it's pretty hard to look past Mike Fondop here. God knows where they would have been this season without him, Oldham, because he's taken his game to another level this year. His hold-up play, his energy. He is. For me, he's become somewhat of a complete forward at this level of football. I feel like it's an absolute no-brainer having Fondop in that side.
He's really come on this season, to be honest, and he's been a bright spark when Oldham have been at the lowest this season, and he's a huge reason why they're in the playoffs. I think if you took his goals away, Oldham wouldn't have finished in the playoffs this season. He's been that pivotal for them, not just with his goals, but also the way he holds the ball up. He offers a lot in the air as well, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned there, they might not have been in the playoffs if not for his goals. I think one key asset is that his goals do pop up at hugely important times. I think I put a post about it a few months ago on Twitter, and it was the amount of goals he scored to put Oldham ahead or to equalise. I think that amounted to about 21 points worth of goals.
Mm-hmm.
And if not for those goals, it'd be absolutely, God knows where Oldham would be, because he's been absolutely exceptional this season for them.
I think we've got, if I'm right in counting, we've got 6 Oldham players and 5 Southend. So I've got Southend, 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 Southend. That is 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 5. And then we've got 6
Yeah.
Oldham players. So it doesn't really tell anyone much, does it, about our predictions overall?
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
any that stand out for you where you're a bit like, I feel maybe that it's the right decision to pick who we are picking, but a bit injustice for the other player, and they deserve a mention.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 3 that stand out for me. Obviously, that not having Evans in there is one of the ones that is probably the tightest of them all. We debated about that for a fair bit. So that says it all really. I feel like also you could very much put in that back line. Goodlift could be changed for any defender at Southend. You could very much put Month into the centre, put Ralph on the left, Raglan into the centre, Taylor on the right. So there's a few in there, and even then there's probably an argument for Ralph at left wing back, but there's so many options, and it's a testament to how strong and how balanced both of these squads are.
Yes.
But I feel like we could talk about this team all day, really, and debate about it. For one player in, one player out for hours and hours, because there's so many different combinations and options. So I feel I'm happy with the team we have picked, though.
I think I am overall as well. Left back was the one with Ralph and Kitchen. That's the only thing, maybe again. But I think I'd be good. I think I'd be leaning, like I said, I'm leaning towards Kitchen. Just because of what he's done over the years.
Yeah.
I know Ralph played for Southend for a long time now, but yeah, I am leaning towards Kitchen more. Defensively, I'm totally fine with the 3 in there. You could probably have any Southend defender, Taylor, Goodlift. These 2 are nailed on. You can't change them. Goalkeeper
Yeah.
nailed on. Respect to Pritchard, but I think that's nailed on as well. And then the midfield, I think that midfield would probably be up there with one of the strongest National League midfields that you could get. And you're thinking about like some of the players that Barnet and York have got. Those 3, I think, would be untouchable, to be fair.
Yeah, I agree. And the balance they actually have as a trio as well. Pet's not got the legs that the other 2 have, but he can sit deep, collect from deep, play on the half turn, spray the ball left and right, find players' feet from distances. His passing range and vision's exceptional. But then also the pressing, the Hassan and Harry, and the energy that Pye Force and Jürgen Nathan bring, it's top quality. But they're also both on different sides of the scale. So Jürgen Nathan's a bit more attack minded. He'll arrive into the box late, get his head on crosses, drive forward himself. Whereas Pye Forson also adds a bit of a defensive aspect, so he can mop up and drop into that defensive role if necessary. I remember watching him play for Dagenham last season, and it was at Woking. I watched him play at Dagenham, and he was just the best player on the pitch by an absolute mile, playing in that holding role. He mopped up everything. He won every second ball. He challenged, never backed out of a tackle. But what made him stand out from every other defensive midfielder at this level was his ability to not make that second touch to tackle himself. So he put his foot on the ball and he distributes safe passes to players who can make something happen. He's a very sensible player. He knows what his capabilities are, but what his capabilities are very impressive. So it is a very well balanced midfield.
Well, I'm totally fine with that team overall. So we've got 6 Oldham players in and 5 Southend United players. Coming back to the actual game itself then now, people probably haven't learnt much about what our predictions are going to be based on that. One side of the scale, if we look at the route to the final, you've got Southend, the comeback kings, I'd describe them as. And then you've got Oldham, and I can only describe them in one word, and that is ruthless. And I feel like I'm doing them an injustice there, but they've been excellent. I can't think of a word to describe them. The way they've just put teams to the sword. If you look at them, you look at Southend, the lazy eye would easily just say, well, Oldham, they're just there. The EFL is literally there for them. They'll do the same to Southend when you look at their position as what they did to York and Halifax. But I just think it's a bit different, particularly with the way Southend play. And I think now that Oldham have already played 2 games in the playoffs, I think Kevin Mayer's going to have has the time to gain more awareness of what Oldham potentially are about. Because I think everyone knows what Oldham are about now. It's finding a way to stop it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. Perfectly there. I think Oldham have that kind of success in playoff matches because they do have that kind of that feel of confidence around their ability to nullify opposition rather than play their own style. Um, and when they do have the ball, they don't try and overcomplicate it. Essentially, it is old school football. You've got a line of big centre backs who will win their duels. You've got experienced midfielders who will do their duty, and you've got a big target man you can use as an outlet. I think Oldham, they've proven that this kind of style of football works in the playoffs and in these kind of highly competitive fixtures. Southend, there's a similar aspect to York where they do like to try and play out from the back. They are all about trying to keep hold of that tempo in the game and control possession. So I can kind of see Oldham going out and maybe playing a similar way as to what they did against York, trying to trigger the press at the right moments, either stop the attack from the front or drop in and stop it at the last moments. That was something Darren Searle said when he was managing at Woking. You want to either stop it at the beginning or make sure you stop it at the end. And if you do that, it means in the middle you've got your time to keep that structure and make sure that you're in the right shape. And that's exactly what I see Oldham doing in this game to try and nullify Southend. But it's such a close game, and it is certainly one that could go either way.
It's certainly kind of, the amount of different predictions we've seen online as well just suggests that. I think in terms of game plans, I think Southend first, they will be trying to keep the game as for 0-0, not concede first. I think it's crucial. I know everyone will say, yeah, but Southend have got this ability to get back into games. I'm not suggesting they don't, but I just feel like whoever Oldham come up against, if they score first and get a 1-goal lead, I just think it plays right into their hands. And I think that's something Southend have got to be wary of. I think going into this game, they've got to have a strong first half. I think it is going to be cagey for me. I can't see Oldham doing what they did to York, or particularly doing what they did to Halifax so early on in a final. It never happens in a final. Obviously, maybe I've just given it the kiss of death for Southend United fans. But just coming back to that stat that I mentioned earlier, since the new format's come in the past 4 years, they've gone to extra time, and in 3 of those years, they've gone to penalties. And if you actually look at since the new format, there's one game that sticks out to me where it was like one side battered the other, and I think that was Salford beating Fylde, and that was back in like 2018. So for me, overall, I just think it's going to be a really cagey game, and it'll be interesting to see how Oldham react to that, because in these two previous games, the games were both done after 50 minutes, weren't they?
Yeah, exactly. It'll probably be a different type of test for Oldham, like you said. I think it'll be cagey, close. Fine margins will end up determining this one. And that's down to Oldham now to try and react to that. Southend have kind of maybe they might be a bit more accustomed to that kind of style of match, which is what kind of throws a spanner in the works for me, because they are all about grit and trying to just finding a way rather than slowly chipping away at a team. But yeah, it's so hard to try and put a finger on what those fine margins will be, and how the game will play out based off those fine margins, because it can literally be anything at this stage. These kind of finals form can go completely out the window. The pressure that are on these players and the atmosphere that's going to be surrounding them is just going to make a huge impact. This will be the kind of game that these kind of players probably have never played in their lives. So yeah, it is very, very tricky to kind of put a finger on what those fine margins are and how it's going to play out.
You look at Oldham as well. The average age of Oldham is 30. A number of those players have been involved in countless playoff campaigns in the past. A number of them have also won the playoffs in the past, in the National League as well. The manager knows how to get out of the National League in the playoffs. Do you think that really means much going into a final?
I think it does, yeah, because it's just, when you get into a match like this, and when it truly matters, you want these kind of players to come in and guide the team. And when you've got players like Jürgen Nathan, Regan Ogle, players like that who maybe haven't played in these kind of games of these statures, you need someone to try and guide them through it, and you need someone to try and make sure that they are just playing to their strengths and snap them out of that kind of almost like that fearful mentality. So these players who have been there and done it make a huge difference to the outcome of this game. And I think, like you said, I think Oldham have a few of those players like that. Southend, they've got Hopper, Ralph spinning, big game scenarios, good lift. He's done it with Sutton. He's played big matches with Sutton. But I think Oldham just seems to tip it for experience at the moment. Players like Corey Evans as well, and so they've done it at the highest of levels in the EFL. And I think that could be something that makes a huge difference over the course of the 90 minutes on Sunday.
We spoke as well about that stat and about it going all the way on many occasions. Southend in both playoff matches so far have gone to extra time, and of course in the one against Forest Green it went to penalties as well. Do you think it's an advantage now, the fact that they've both gone, because it's not like they're going to tire from that, because there's been such a gap since the semi-final, and they know what extra time's about, they know how to win on penalties even. Of course, penalties, you can't read much into that at all, but they've got that experience of going to extra time, where for Oldham it's gone all their way, hasn't it, in both games? The games have been wrapped up after an hour, so...
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that the time gap between matches, because we've seen how significant that can be. And how different teams can react to that in different ways. So when Oldham faced York, York have come off the back of a pretty large time gap, and you can tell it makes a huge impact in terms of mentality, sharpness, how on it these players are in general. They are both in the same boat this time, albeit, so it will just depend on the individual and how they can react to having a few weeks off leading up to a big game. But it's tricky. It is really tricky to kind of decipher, because we are trying to sit here, we're nitpicking these tiny fine margins that might make a difference, and that is just a testament to how good both these teams are and how closely contested it's going to be. Because for example, not the example you may want to hear, Halifax Oldham, there's a fine margin, I think, between those two teams before going into the game, in terms of general quality. So you're looking at that and you're thinking, there's no tiny intricate little differences that can make an impact on this game. You'd have to probably have Oldham go out and play really poorly, and Halifax would have to go out and really try and nullify what Oldham are trying to do to try and get anything out of the game. In this match, you could have both teams go out there and play their very best against each other, and one team could very much still go out and come off the loser, and that's what makes this playoff final so interesting to me. I'm very excited to see how it turns out. But yeah, the fine margins mean absolutely everything.
They're always cagey as well, of finals in the actual playoffs themselves. They're always high scoring in the semis and even the quarters. I know we've seen games where they've been 2-2 like last year, but they weren't extremely entertaining games, and particularly early on, they're very cagey as well. Nobody wants to concede early on, and I think Southend will be wary of what Oldham can do to teams, and they'll be well equipped to deal with that. I think York tried to as well. I thought they actually did well in the first 20 minutes, and it was always going to take a mistake for Oldham to score. But once Oldham scored, they were in the driving seat, and then that just played right into their hands. So I think for Southend, they were trying to just keep it tight, probably control the game, because I think they are capable of doing that. But Oldham will try do to Southend what they've done to the past two oppositions. In terms of predictions then, how do you see the game going? And then at the end, how do you see your prediction?
So I see it going very similarly to the Oldham York game in terms of maybe not scoreline, but in terms of the way that the game plays out. I think it's going to be Southend attempting to, control the game, dictate the play at their own tempo. And I think Oldham are going to go out and try and press them. I think they're going to try and make the back line uncomfortable, force them into making errors. With the likes of Pritchard, who can push up really high and have an influence in the final third. I think that suits a press as well. And I think if Oldham, they'll look to counter on or make the most of errors that they can kind of force on Southend. The one advantage Kevin Mayer does have to try and counteracting that is he would have watched the Oldham York game, and it basically gives him a time limit, 2-week time limit before the final, to try and think of some way to counter what Oldham do. but like you said, I think it's going to be a closer game. I think it's going to be a game of very low risk. I think neither team are going to be wanting to, step too far out of their comfort zone at the risk of making an error that could cost them the game. And I think it'll be overall very gritty, very cagey. And I think the general style of play for both sides will be very similar to the Oldham York match.
Actual prediction then? Do you see it going extra time and penalties, or do you think it'll be wrapped up?
I see it going to extra time. Yeah. So do you want me to give my score prediction now? Then yeah.
Yeah, do. Yeah.
I'm going to go 1-1 at full time, and then I'm going to go Oldham to win it 2-1 in extra time. And that is I've had so many different thoughts about how this final could go, but that was ultimately my very first thought when I saw what these two teams are going to that these two teams are going to be in the final, and I've stuck with that from the get go. So yeah, 1-1 at full time, 2-1 Oldham win in extra time.
I don't want to over-analyse your prediction, but why do you necessarily think Oldham will score that winner in extra time compared to Southend?
I just think later in the game that experience will come out and kind of it's tricky for me to kind of explain it, because ultimately my very first thought was that's going to be the score. We've kind of know, like, just at the first glance. So essentially I've kind of put the score in my head and then instantly thought, okay, now I need to try and pick apart my own brain and decipher why I think that at first glance. And essentially I thought, that experience is very valuable. I think Oldham, again, you've got a game plan that is suited to the playoffs. I think there will be trouble caused by Southend in terms of their players coming off the bench, but ultimately I just think that experience will just tip Oldham over the edge. And I think that fan base they've got is just so passionate about that team. And I think you'll be able to, albeit both fan bases are going to be there in full force, I just think having that set of Oldham fans behind you can make a huge difference in a game like this. So yeah, that's kind of my reasoning behind it.
This is my thoughts. I think it'll definitely go to penalties. But then who do you pick on penalties? That's the thing.
Yeah.
I think it'll be 1-1 in full time. I think it'll be really cagey early on. I don't think it'll be a cracker early on, let's put it this way. And then I think Oldham will score first. Southend will equalise. Then it'll be full time. Then I think in extra time, Oldham will score again. Then Southend will equalise. But then penalties. You can't analyse who's going to win on penalties, can you? Because it's like, it could be anyone or anything. It could be Slough Town versus Oldham in a final. If it went to penalties, you don't know who you're picking, do you? So it's not really about ability. It's about who's got kind of the bottle for the penalties.
You have to take a look at the goalkeepers as well. The goalkeepers are a huge, look at them, maybe their penalty saving records. Maybe Hudson's maybe not the most. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there are factors to play in.
No,
How was that?
They're not going to like this fan base. To be fair, they actually said that they wanted me to predict them to lose because I've got everything wrong about Oldham this season, I should say. Yeah,
they've said the same to me as well. Yeah, so they're not going to like my prediction.
To make it interesting, it would be the perfect fairy tale. I'm not saying if Oldham didn't get promoted, it would be like a good story, them getting back into the Football League. But if Southend did it, that is like the perfect fairy tale. It's worth a documentary being made on them, I think. If they, everyone would love it if they'd have made one about this season, because they've not been in the playoffs until their 45th game week. They've then maintained a playoff spot. The way their playoff games have gone, of course, Oldham have been exceptional of blue teams away, but the way Southend, this kind of underdog story of the comebacks that they've had as well in the playoffs, I think tells you everything. With the ownership issues that they've had, to the extent that they had it, I know Oldham had it pretty bad, but the extent of them being an hour away from going out of existence, it would be the perfect narrative for them to get back into the Football League. So I think it'll be 2-2, the way it's gone, and I think Southend will do it on penalties. That's my prediction overall. Yeah,
I mean, I can't argue with that. If in the scenario in which it does go to penalties, Southend have, if I did think it were to go to penalties, I think I'd probably have Southend to edge it. But I just feel like Oldham's experience, if they were to go a goal ahead in the latter stages, I feel like that would kind of come up, it would come important to them. And I think that's the kind of the difference between, Rochdale and the difference between Forest Green. I think there's a much more experienced core to that Oldham team that will kind of, see them through a game if they are to take that goal advantage in play in extra time. So, but yeah, I mean, like we said, it is such a tightly knit game. There's such little kind of separating the teams. It is just, any prediction for this match is justifiable.
I might be going back on myself now. I still think Southend will win. But what I will say, if there's going to be a winner in full time or extra time, I think it'll go to Oldham, because I do think man to man they're the better side. I think they've got slightly better players, particularly in the midfield as well. That's what I think. But like I said, just in pens, I think Southend better goalkeeper. They know what it's like. Penalties, have done it in the semi-final. I don't know. They know how to win those when it's fine margins, don't they? I'm not saying Oldham don't.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that from them yet. People will probably say, we're putting teams to the sword. But yeah, I am going to go for Southend to win for a different prediction. But I think it'll be extremely tight, this game. And I'm hoping it lives up to the expectation, because it is going to be a record-breaking attendance. My first actual appearance at Wembley for a playoff final. So in the press box as well. So it would be amazing if, it did live up to the expectation, whoever wins. As a neutral, I'm not particularly bothered who does actually win. I think both clubs bring something to the division, so we're going to get one of them next season. Both clubs, someone's mentioned there, would not be a fairy tale for Oldham. I'm not saying it wouldn't. I just think the story would be slightly better for Southend overall. But yeah, I think it'll be a cracker anyway, so hopefully it is.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned just there, both teams offer something to the division. I actually, a question for you in terms of next season, whoever doesn't win this, what do you think are their limits next season? Because personally, I look at, if Southend was to go and lose this, I kind of look at them as a team still in a project and are still kind of looking to build a team strong enough. So I think, you could probably see them pushing for the playoffs again next season at the most. Whereas I think if Oldham are to lose, I think I could very much see them going and absolutely storming the division next year. Having something, they feel like they're owed it almost in a way, and I feel like I could see them going absolutely running riot. So what would you think if either team could offer to the National League next year if they were to go and lose?
That was actually a question that I wrote down and I forgot to ask you. For me, overall, I agree about Southend. I think, in a way, they didn't expect this to come this season. I think it's their first year in their project. For Oldham, I think it's their third year since they had the takeover. I think in the long term, overall, I think both sides will be out of this league very soon.
Yeah.
I think if Oldham lose the uproar next season, there's so much pressure on them. The pressure is on them in this final compared to Southend. I think both sides have got a relative amount of pressure, but particularly Oldham. Next season, I spoke to an Oldham fan and they said, are the owners going to get bored? I disagree with that, but are they going to keep wanting to chuck money at it next season? I don't particularly think that they've gone to extreme lengths in that department anyway, but I just think you've got Forest Green, you've got York, you've got Carlisle coming down. I don't know if people have seen, Wigan Linn is apparently about to sign for them, which is tells you the intentions of them. They're not playing about next season, and Nick Horton's rumoured as well. You've got sides like Woking who'll be wanting to improve as well. I think next season it's going to be really competitive. I can't see York going out and storming the league like certain people predict. So you could say something about Southend, but I don't think there's much pressure on them next season. And I still think in the summer they're going to heavily recruit, no matter if they're promoted or not. And they've got a good core of a squad there. For Oldham, Jürgen Nathan, there's no way in a million years, even if they get promoted, he's signing for them.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a really hard player to replace. Would they lose anyone in the summer? You'll correct me on this. Is Pritchard signed for them, or is he on loan from Accrington?
He's signed, but only until the end of the season, so they'll have to renew a deal. So I assume there'll probably be interest. So yeah, who knows if he'll be there next year?
Exactly, and he could. I think Oldham would sign him. But still, then again, you never know. I think he's definitely capable of playing in the Football League. Whereas Southend, I can't see particularly anyone leaving in the summer. I don't think they'd have to. I think they've got a good core of the squad where I don't think they could afford to lose a player and be able to replace it. Oldham, they found a winning formula with Yoganathan, particularly in the midfield. I know everyone's probably seen him and raving about him, but he'll leave. You've got to find a replacement for that. And I know that's a very hard position to replace. And you still never know. You might lose more players. So I think both sides would be fine, but I think I'd be more confident about Southend next season than I would Oldham, if that makes sense. What about you? I know you kind of mentioned it earlier.
See, yeah, I kind of feel the opposite to that. I feel like Southend will kind of go into next season with the same intentions of just reaching the playoffs, but I feel like next season Oldham would have the capabilities of maybe pushing that title. It's not me saying I don't want Oldham to go up, because I actually would quite like to see Oldham go up as well. I'm not really bothered, again, like you, who actually goes up. But one thing I actually would not mind seeing at all is seeing that kind of rivalry between Oldham and York blossom a little bit more. That made for some really good entertainment this season in the National League over, social media and the fixtures that came out. When you think about it, it's probably one of the closest things we've had to, Wrexham and Notts County in recent years, where it's two teams that are, there's no real local rivalry or no history behind it, but they really don't like each other, these two fan bases, and they really want to one up each other all the time.
Yes.
Oldham got the better of them in the playoffs, and York got the better of them in the league. But so to see that kind of blossom a little bit more and kind of unravel will be quite interesting. But I think both sides will be up there next season. Whoever is to go and lose.
It'd be funny if, for York, I suppose, if Oldham do lose, because we'd be looking at all the comments, it'd just be full of York fans giving loads of stick.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that with Oldham and York, I don't have an issue with them, but it's funny for the division because they just, both fan bases love to just comment on everything I do if I ever don't predict them to win. As you can see, I've got a York top that I need to wear for my next one because I lost the predictions league. It might as well have been half and half, York and Oldham, to be honest, if they made shirts.
Yeah.
Anyway, because to be fair, I think both fan bases will always give you stick and stuff, and I suppose it is always a thing with bigger clubs. Someone's mentioned as well, and I'm not having this at all. Luke wants to keep Oldham in the National League for extra views on his videos. Definitely not, because Southend and Oldham give me the same amount of views. They probably give, well, both clubs give me an awful amount of views, to be fair. So I don't think I wouldn't want to lose either, to be honest, but I'm going to lose one, so yeah. But anyway, that kind of wraps everything up. Sam, I do really appreciate you coming on tonight. Once again, to give you a preview. I don't know if that's the first time that you've made your prediction public or not, but yeah, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, no, anytime, mate. I really enjoy the podcasts. Hopefully there'll be more over pre-season. I really enjoy coming on. Uni's done now, so, the pre-season's really begun now. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I certainly am as well. And I think next season as well, for me personally, I've done my A-levels. I've got that year where it's kind of a gap, not a gap year, a summer off where I don't have to think about too much, to be honest. So hopefully I can produce a lot of content myself. Thanks to everyone that's tuned in tonight. Once again, I do really appreciate it. And it worked with the last podcast this season, but I just like to say I do appreciate the support over the season, particularly in the last couple of months, because it has kind of blown up once again. We've kind of had gone upwards in the channel, I suppose, to put it like that. So yeah, I do appreciate the support overall. Check out our sponsors, Cards Accepted. There's a link in the description for you to do that. Get 50% off your card machine. No contracts or monthly fees. If you'd like to become a channel member, it is just £2.99 a month. Once again, thanks to everyone that's tuned in. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you at Wembley. Bye for now.